Now let's talk about accessing the basic building blocks of our 3D models, the components. So we looked at creating models and bringing those in, moving those around, but in order to get more complex models like those we saw in the kitchen set, and even more complex characters and vehicles and things like that, you're going to have to access the building blocks of these models, and those are called components. So we looked at how to go to object mode. So you can see if I click on this particular object, this is a polygon cube here, you can see that I'm in object mode, and you can also see up here how this button is selected here, select by object type, here on the status line. Now right next to this is how we're going to go to component mode. This is going to allow us to access the pieces that make up this polygon, because right now all we can do is really move this around, rotate it, scale it, but we can't change the shape of it. So to do this, we want to go to component mode. So we'll click on component mode. You can also toggle that back and forth using F8 on your keyboard. So now we're in component mode. You can see the display of our polygon cube changes a little bit. You can see these lines change from green to blue, and you can see we have pink dots on the corner. So let's talk about what these components are. So we're going to start with the vertex. So this pink dot here on all of the corners of the cube is called a vertex. Okay, if you have multiple of these, you call them either vertexes or vertices. Either one's okay. And so what these are is basically just a 3D point in space, and it really has no size. The fact that we can see it at all is just sort of a display thing so that we can see where that is. But it's really just a set of coordinates in X, Y, and Z, defining a position in 3D space, and then we have a vertex there. Okay, these lines connecting the vertices are called edges. Okay, so we've got vertices are the points, edges connect the points. Okay, and then the actual part of the geometry that we can see are called faces. Okay, so we've got the points connected by edges, and then the edges connect together with other points to form faces. Now to access these different types of components, we can go up here to this filter, and you can see we've got points selected here. We can also select line components, so select the edges, or we can select these faces. Okay. Another way to access our components is to use our right-click marking menu. So if we go back to object mode, if I right-click on the object, you can see that I have a marking menu, and I've got edges, vertex, and face here that I can select. So if I want to just select the vertices, I can go ahead and select vertex and very quickly select those. Now we can use the same methods that we use to transform our models to transform these individual components. So I can transform the vertices, choose edges, and transform those, or I can choose a face and transform those. Okay, so this is how the model is made up. Now this, you can see that this particular type of face has 4 sides, but polygons don't need to only be 4-sided. Okay, we could have a polygon that has 8 sides or 10 sides, or we could have a polygon that has only 3 sides. Okay, 3 is going to be the minimum. 4 is going to be what a lot of people will use, just because it gives you more clean results when you're smoothing, when you're working with it. It's a little bit more predictable. And then anything above a 4-sided polygon, which is called a quad, anything above that in terms of the number of sides it has is going to be referred to as an n-gon. So n being any number of sides over 4. Okay, so the 3 basic types are going to be triangle, quad, and n-gon. Okay, so those are the components of a polygon. So it's pretty straightforward. It's very explicit as far as these, these points are strictly defined as a point in 3D space, which is connected to another point in 3D space via an edge. And then that network connects to create a particular face, which then gets rendered. Okay, now moving on to NURBS, the components of a NURBS object are going to be similar, but they're going to work a little bit different. So here we have our NURBS object. If we go to component mode, okay, you can see, we go to select control vertex, you can see that we do have these purple points, and these are going to be called CVs, or control vertices. Okay, now one of the big differences that you'll notice here as we look at this is the fact that these CVs are not on the surface. Okay, so the way that NURBS are created is a little bit more, well, a lot more about math and not as much about explicit locations in 3D space and these faces. So what we've got here are these vertices and then a surface underneath that is being calculated based on these points. Okay, so I can still grab these points and I can still move them around, but you can see the influence of those is a little bit different. Okay, it's more about pulling out that influence rather than strictly pulling out that particular surface. Okay, so we can access and move the CVs, and there's really only one other component of a NURBS object that we can move around and access, and that's going to be the hull, H-U-L-L. And so to access the hull, we'll go ahead and right-click on our to get our marking menu, go to Hull, and you can see this little orange cage. Now all of these points correspond to the CVs that we saw earlier. So this is, you can think of this as sort of like the network of edges over here on our polygon. Okay, so in order to select a hull, we'll just simply click on any section of this line. So if I click on this section, it's going to select this entire line. So this whole thing is one hull. Okay, if I want to click on this line here, I'll click on any section of it, and it's going to select that entire hull. And we can actually move those around. It's very similar to the effect that you would get if you would simply select those CVs and move those around. But now we're able to select the lines, and it's going to go all the way around. So if you've got a circular object like this, it's going to go completely around versus the line going from top to bottom. You can see how it selects that. Okay. Now isoparms are a little bit different. You can actually add resolution and detail to your object by adding isoparms. Okay, so these lines here that are actually on the surface are going to be your isoparms. But if you select an isoparm, there's nothing really you can do with it. You can't move it around, you can't scale it or anything like that. It's going to just help to define the shape of your model. So to actually move parts of that model, you're going to access the hulls or the CVs. Okay? So that's a NURBS object in simple terms. The subdivision object you can think of as being very, very similar to the polygon object. So looking at this, you can see how that works. Looking at this, you can see that it's very, very smooth. Okay? So we can think of this as sort of like a polygon that is being smoothed, and we can't see the polygon. So kind of an invisible polygon that's being smoothed. Okay? And so if we take a look at this, we can access the vertex, and you can see again these vertices are not on the surface. We can also access edges. Now if we access edges, you can see what looks like our polygon object. You can see it's very sharp, it's got a cube shape, and so this is kind of what we can think of as this invisible polygon object that the subdivision surface is being derived from using a little bit of math. Okay, so we can use the points to move these around, the vertex. Okay, you can see we can select edges and move those around. Okay, now when we're working with polygons, we can also select the faces as well. Okay, when we're working with subds rather, if we're going to be adding or subtracting any geometry from this, there are a couple of things to think about. One is right now we're in standard mode, and there are two modes to work with when you're working with subdivision surfaces. So right now we're in standard mode. If we go up here to our surfaces menu set, and then we'll go to subdivision surfaces, we can go to polygon proxy mode. Let me go to object mode here. We can go to polygon proxy mode, and this will actually treat that pink cage that we saw earlier as a polygon while still allowing us to see the subdivision surface underneath. So I can now select all of those points, and you can see it looks a little bit more like the polygon in component mode with the blue, light blue cage. And so I can select the points of that polygon and move it around. It's still just sort of an imaginary polygon that's being used to create this smooth geometry that we can actually see. But the advantage of using this is that we can now use all of our polygon modeling tools on our subdivision surface. Okay, and when we're done, we can always go back into standard mode, and then that kind of goes away, although the points and the edges that it's deriving that geometry from are still there. Okay, so just kind of think of it as a polygon that is being smoothed underneath. So you're able to get a smoother surface, but you're still able to use the polygon modeling tools and treat it more like a polygon. So these two on the ends are going to be a lot more closely related than, for instance, the NURBS type of geometry. Okay, so looking at this, we're able to create different complexity types of models of different complexities just based on these simple components. So if I go ahead and take the NURBS and the subdivision surface and hit Control-H to hide them, we can see that this cube is a very, very simple, one of the most simplest forms of polygonal geometry. But the same types of components are involved in creating a bust like this. So looking at this, we've got points, we've got edges, and we've got faces as far as the components go. And looking at this model, if we move up here, we've got exactly the same types of components. Okay, so going in our marking menu, we've got vertices that are here, which we can move those around. We've got edges, okay, and then we've also got faces. Okay, so the only difference is the number of faces is different and the configuration is different. So it's all going to be about, as you go into your modeling, just taking what you know about these models and extending that into creating very specific configurations and methods for doing specific things, methods for creating specific outcomes. But it's all based on these small little pieces, these little components, the vertices, the faces, and edges in the case of polygons. Okay? So eventually, when you get down the road, you'll be able to create something like this just using those simple components. All right, in the next lesson, let's start to take a look at some of the tools that will allow you to get this result. Okay, things like extruding geometry. What are some of the basic tools that you're going to be using a lot as you go into your modeling a little bit further? Okay, so we'll look at some of those tools in the next lesson.